that focuses on canceling personal debt that people have around the country, like medical debt and student debt. They were a big part of advocating for the cancellation of student debt, and they continue to seek greater, more, so all student debt is canceled. So we have a speaker. Thomas. Can't really see the names that clearly, but Thomas, if you, welcome. And I believe you're from up further upstate than us, Watertown area. Welcome, and you can go ahead with your presentation.
Hi, thanks so much for inviting me. And I did live in Syracuse for a few years, and I recognize some familiar faces and names. So it's really great to be invited back virtually. I'm an organizer and one of the co-founders of the Debt Collective, and we are trying to create a new kind of union, a debtors union, sort of modeled on a labor union, but organizing people who are in debt for their basic needs to take collective action to sort of rebalance accounts with creditors. So we're not just focused on student debt, but we have been putting a lot of effort into student debt. I've been invited to say a few things about how socialists should talk about student debt cancellation and inflation. I'm a little intimidated because I'm not an economist, and it doesn't take too much to get beyond my comprehension on economic matters. But I know way more about debt than I would care to. And I guess the first thing I would say is that to some degree, we shouldn't talk about it because it's really a non-issue. It's kind of a made up fake thing that, the student debt cancellation event and conversation just happened to be taking place at a time of record-setting inflation. And so the people who were opposed to it were looking for any kind of boogeyman they could find, and inflation was the issue of the moment. If they had canceled student debt 6 months ago, those same people would somehow be saying that canceling student debt would be helping Putin. If they did it 20 years ago, they'd be saying it would help Saddam Hussein. Like it's a silly argument. And so I do like to direct people towards what the actual economists have said. Nobel Prize winning economists like Joseph Stiglitz and Paul Krugman have both sort of called BS on this and said student debt cancellation will have a microscopic impact on inflation. And even the economists who have been making a big stink, and it's really been two people. It's Larry Summers and Jason Furman. These are Harvard economists who had official roles in the Obama and Clinton administrations. They also have a pretty checkered record on their own economic policies in terms of handling the housing crisis and the Wall Street bailouts. And even Jason Furman's own modeling of how this impacts inflation shows it's very, very small. So something else is going on here, something almost like the way to analyze it isn't to use economics, it's to use psychology, right? So somebody said on Twitter that these are economists who are trying to defend their God. There's something kind of irrational about what they're saying. We should be getting new inflation numbers next week. I have no idea what they're going to say. Like I really don't know. But everyone was surprised by last month's numbers, which showed that for the month of July, inflation was basically flat. So it was still historically high over last year, but it had paused. And so maybe that was a weird fluke and inflation will go up again. I don't know, but it'll be curious to see. A few other things to say, why might an economist say that student debt cancellation would increase inflation? Well, let me back up. Part of this cancellation announcement is being paired with restarting payments on January 1st, which is something that we need to organize to prevent. And the debt collective is actually organizing a student debt strike. You can go to bit.ly/student debt strike. We're not encouraging people to default. We're encouraging people to get to $0 monthly payments in a way that is safe and protected. But you can imagine if they were to restart payments, suddenly 45 million people have an average monthly bill of $400, which is going to remove a ton of money from the economy, right? So from the economist's perspective, that would help with inflation to just remove some of the supply of money. But I think it's important to say, like, there's a difference between how economists talk about inflation in a very abstract way and the way that inflation hits ordinary everyday people in their lived experience, right? Inflation to the working class means it's harder to pay your bills. Your money doesn't go as far as it used to. It's hard to fill the gas tank. It's hard to put food on the table. Giving people an extra $400 bill every month is the same as inflation, right? It's going to make it even harder. But that's the exact opposite of what economists mean when they talk about inflation, right? That's actually a good thing. In fact, Larry Summers' prescription for what we should be doing right now is deliberately increasing unemployment in order to solve inflation. That causes an enormous amount of human misery. So if we care at all about human flourishing, we should be looking at other approaches, right? If you want to remove money from the economy, we can tax the rich to do that. That's, of course, requires some difficult political changes to happen. But part of this is about if we need to balance the economy differently in order to address inflation, who's going to pay? Who's going to pay? And it shouldn't be the people at the bottom. So I think it's important to remember who has student debt. 2/3 of all student debt is held by women. Black women are forced to take on the most. It is a form of poverty tax, right? The rich have no student debt. If you don't come from a family that is wealthy enough to just pay for tuition, you are either priced out altogether or you're forced to take on debt. And the less money you have, the more debt you're forced to take on. So I'm sure there's a bunch of other things that we could talk about, but I might stop talking and see if folks have any questions or comments about that.
Thank you very much. So we can open it up to anyone in person or online. If you, I think Kira's watching the stack online. So if you're online, you can write stack or your name, or otherwise indicate that you have a comment or question. And then Kira can let me know, I guess, or you can take turns calling people maybe.
Well, we already have one person on stack. David Harding, do you want to unmute yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Tom, for coming here and talking to us about this very important issue. I know there has been talk in New York State, in the state legislature, about passing a law that would, if there is debt cancellation or debt relief, Biden's plan does go through about not having the debt relief be taxable as a form of income. Is there a concern about if there is this kind of student debt relief, which there should be, the tax ramifications of it being considered income for someone and then having to pay tax on it. And by tax, I mean income tax, federal or state.
That's a great question. I am not an economist. I am also not a tax lawyer. So I'm very hesitant to talk about the particulars because I don't want to steer people wrong. The experts we have spoken to have said specifically in New York State, this is likely not going to be an issue. And that even what the legislature is proposing to do is probably more for show than because it's actually necessary to do that. Now, whether or not that's going to be true in all states still remains to be seen. There might be a couple states where just because they want to hurt what they see as a policy that is maybe too popular and going to give the other party too much of a victory, they want to undermine it if they can. So I'm hoping that over the course of the next week or two, the tax experts will come to a consensus and that there will be a clear resource that we can point people to. But I'm not in any position to give anyone tax advice. That's for sure.
Anyone in person, raise your hand.
Just one thing that I wanted to add was a statistic that I read recently. I know a lot of people can find it. They believe that one of the challenges to canceling student debt is helping all of the banks finance whatever's been lost or repaid. But I recently read that actually 95% of student debt is directly owed to the United States government. So it's not even private institutions who have this debt owed to them, but instead the government itself. So it would be very easy logistically to cancel the majority of it.
Francesca.
Just got a quick question. Is it true that a lot of the debt is interest on loans?
Were you able to hear that?
Is it true that a lot of the debt is interest on student loans?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so much of our system is broken that nobody knows the answer, right? Nobody, not the Federal Reserve, not the Department of Education, nobody has been keeping track of the records in a way that would let us answer that question. And it's tricky because, there are many people who have had student debt for many decades now, and their monthly payments don't cover the interest. So the balance just grows and grows and grows and grows. Some people have paid off their original balance multiple times and are still in more debt than they originally borrowed. So it seems like an easy question to ask and answer, right? How much of the $1.9 trillion of outstanding debt is interest? The trouble is that over the years, as people consolidate their loans, that interest gets capitalized and added to the principal, and then the servicers don't keep adequate records of that. So what we can tell is the amount of uncapitalized interest that is out there, but that doesn't really reflect the true nature because so much of that 1 trillion at some point in time was interest that got capitalized. So I wish I had an answer for you, but the truth is nobody knows.
Thank you so much. We have 2 more questions here online. Yeah, Ethan would like his question read. So Ethan asks, so I'm curious about potential legal challenges from the GOP. Is there any news on that front? And then Jasmine Collins would like to unmute and say her question.
For now, Gokey.
Go ahead.
Oh, my question is, how much energy is the debt collective sort of directing toward preventing new student loan debts from proliferating? And does the debt collective have a plan for helping voters and politicians to understand the fundamental problem of luring new young people who just entered adulthood into these situations where they're paying loans in the first place?
Two excellent questions. I think I'll take the second one first, if that's okay. So why do we have student debt in the first place, right? Many other countries that have much smaller economies than ours, don't have student debt, right? You can go to Norway and get a PhD and graduate without a penny of student debt. And so the ultimate solution here is to stop debt financing higher ed altogether. We can fully fund all public 2- and 4-year college and universities so that they're completely free to attend. From a purely economic dollars and cents standpoint, this is painfully easy to do. It's an affordable cost. It's a rounding error on the Pentagon's budget to do this. And so, there's a really great, if you really want to dig into it, there's a recent book by a historian of American capitalism called Indentured Students that sort of gives the history of why we do student debt in this country to begin with. And the Cliff Notes version of it is that this is part of the legacy of segregation. There were points in US history where they said, hey, we really need a more educated public, and K through 12 isn't enough. We should just fully fund universities and make them free. And the universities themselves said, we don't want government money. Now, who turns away government money? Like who turns away free, public funding? And the universities knew that as soon as they accepted public funding, they'd be forced to integrate. So the compromise here was that the universities would continue to have complete control over admission and segregate admission, and that the government would fund universities indirectly by funding the students. So we basically have a voucher system, right, between grants, work study, GI Bill, and increasingly federal student loans that get attached to the student, and then the universities compete for the money by competing for the students. Which is, if you want to see what the future of a voucherized system for K through 12 would look like, higher ed gives you the clue of what that would look like, right? So prices would skyrocket, and it would be bad news. So the ultimate solution here, and the solution the Debt Collective is organizing for, is college for all. There was a serious attempt to get 2 years of community college. I say serious. I'm not sure if that's really fair. Biden sort of caved with the slightest bit of pushback on that. But there's no reason that we can't win that in the future. So that's the ultimate solution. Just like the ultimate solution to medical debt is Medicare for all. Medical debt just shouldn't exist. On the legal challenges front, the law is really on our side here. The legal authority is solid. It is clear. The real danger is that having the law on your side is not enough. This is the United States of America. So what the Republicans are trying to do is to say, canceling student debt was part of the last presidential campaign. Biden campaigned on canceling 10,000. He won the election. He fulfilled this promise. Rather than trying to win at the ballot box, they want to hijack the courts and throw out the law and overturn the will of the people. There's no guarantees here, right? At a certain level, this is about power. And so this is part of why we think debtors need to get organized and build a counterpower. But if the courts follow the law, we're totally safe. The law's on our side.
I have a question. What does debtors getting organized look like very practically?
So that is a great question. And I think it's different for each debt type, right? It's going to look very different for how to organize around medical debt. And one thing that we have done that has been successful is organizing debt strikes. We started with students who attended predatory for-profit colleges and people who refused to pay their student loans and demand that the Obama administration enforce the law to cancel those fraudulent loans. Obama put an enormous amount of resistance, but just in June 1st, Vice President Harris announced all former Corinthian College Incorporated students would be getting full cancellation. And it was Corinthian students who first went on strike. But you could imagine during the housing crisis, in the US, we bailed out Wall Street and left homeowners underwater on their mortgages and foreclosed on them if they couldn't pay. Iceland took the exact opposite approach, right? They threw the bankers in jail, and then they had a partial jubilee, writing down underwater mortgages. What if we had a debtors union that could organize every single household in an underwater mortgage to collectively bargain with the banks a write down? So I think there's a ton of potential for debtor organizing, and we've only scratched the surface so far. We have moved mountains. We have done things that people told us was impossible. And the more debtors who get organized, I think we're totally unstoppable. But organizing is hard. There's no shortcuts here, and it really is a matter of whether or not we're willing to roll up our sleeves and do it.
We have one last question from online. Chiara, do you want to unmute?
Sure. Hi. Can you hear me? All right. Awesome. So I guess I wanted to build off of Jasmine's comment, and I wanted to know, what are future steps for debt cancellation, and what do you need from us in order to fuel this?
Great. So yeah, we've won somewhere between $300 and $500 billion of debt cancellation. And roughly 20 million people will be debt-free after this. But for some people, 10,000 or 20,000 doesn't really change their situation at all. So there's a lot more work to be done. The good news is that this authority, we can do it as many times as it takes. And this is sort of how I envision, I can't predict the future, but how I envision this working going forward is we need, in order to win college for all, that really takes Congress to do it. But right now, there is only one senator in Congress who supports college for all, and that's Bernie Sanders. There's maybe 20 members of the House who support college for all. So convincing Congress to do this is going to be a brutal uphill long-term bet. I mean, it's going to be like winning Medicare for all. But we have the opportunity to have this sort of like push-pull dynamic where we can say, look, you should vote to pass college for all. And if you don't, we're just going to have to cancel more debt. And you can see the way that certain members of Congress are just really throwing a temper tantrum at the thought that poor people could get their debt canceled. If they want to avoid that, they should pass college for all. And we're going to have to cancel the debt again and again and again, as many times as it takes until we break them. We broke Joe Biden, and if you can get someone like Joe Biden to cancel student debt, we can break anyone, right? In the short term, private student loans are just a completely different animal. We are starting to organize around private student loan cancellation using different mechanisms. So I would encourage you to join the Debt Collective and to join, I believe on September 20th, we're having our first private student loan debtors assembly. And this is like, there's no magic silver bullets here. This is going to be a bit of an experiment, and it's going to probably be a several-year campaign. But we think we should be able to cancel a fair amount of private student loans. On medical debt, Biden can cancel all medical debt held by the Veterans Administration. And we believe that most hospital debt should be canceled if the IRS really started enforcing some of the regulations that are already on the books. So there's a lot that we can do on other fronts. Yeah. Who owes money to the VA? There are a lot of people who have medical debt that is held by the VA, particularly veterans.